Hi, all. I'm Fred McMurray, and it's time for another episode of Cargo Chronicles. We'll be talking with Eric Trout, Senior Vice President of Harbor Freight Transport, about what he heard and saw at Breakbulk 2026 in New Orleans. How are we doing today, Eric?
Doing well. Just getting caught up from being out last week. That's the wonderful thing about going to trade shows. They're extremely educational. You get to see a lot of people, but the emails still keep coming in, right? So, with opportunities. Hey, if you're waiting on a rate quote or an email from me, I apologize. I'm almost caught up.
I believe me, after being 2 weeks on the road, I'm still attempting to catch up.
Yeah.
So today, one of the things that I've been told that's come to my attention, one of the big topics was the aging workforce and safety pressures that this causes when you got a whole bunch of new, younger folk coming into the industry that haven't seen disasters. So tell us your thoughts, your impressions, your what you've learned about workforce and safety pressures in the shipping logistics industry.
Yeah, I mean it's true, right? Most of the workforce out there today that is in this space of project cargo, it's a very it's an old line of business, right? It's been in place before containerization, right? So it's always been around. But as you know, we moved in the industry towards global trade, containerization, et cetera. A lot of practices were standardized, right? And the 40-foot ocean container, et cetera. But on this project cargo, you've got a litany of people who have this carnal knowledge, and it's unfortunately an um, older workforce, right? The younger workforce, um, they really don't have a lot of knowledge about the opportunities in the break bulk and cargo world. We're doing our fair share to educate the younger people coming up through the ranks. Especially some of the recent college students, coming through the supply chain management degrees that are out there at the major universities. It just doesn't seem like there's a lot of discussion on project cargo and out of gauge cargo. So you've got this market where it's very highly specialized, and the workforce that has the carnal knowledge of how to do this, the age gap is, they're getting older, people are retiring, and there's just not a lot of people who find their way into it, in particular younger people. So you've kind of got two worlds, diverging. You've got a young workforce coming in, they want to get into transportation and logistics. They really have no knowledge about project cargo or break bulk. And at the same time, you've got a knowledge base of employees who specialize in this field, and they're aging out. So it's real difficult to attract new people into the workforce, right? You've got some extremely critical safety issues, right? And then you try to train a new employee. It can be rather challenging, right? Doing that type of work. We've heard AI. AI was the big buzz, and it's everywhere. But I attended a couple sessions where I think the general consensus was AI in the project cargo place Yeah, it's going to be there, but it's going to take some time, right? Because machine learning, things like that, you've got to have that knowledge develop, but you're always going to have somebody who has to spot check or validate, the findings of that. Um, Now you get into the physical labor side of like project cargo, crane operators, riggers, drivers who are specialized and have the knowledge to be able to move this type of cargo. And that workforce gets smaller and smaller, right? Not everybody wants to wake up and be a crane operator. Unfortunately, that's it is unfortunate because everybody wants to go to college and become a poli sci major or something like that, where they think they can make six figures, where the reality of it is you could, learn how to operate a crane, go through the proper safety courses and training, and you could be making that same type of money because it's a highly specialized field. But it takes time and training, and I think today's workforce, they want the instant gratification, right? And there were a couple sessions about attracting new employees and the type of things that the companies have to do. You get the younger workforce, they want the vacation time, they want to work remote, they want a uh, a friendly environment, right? I've walked into some truck brokerage operations with ping pong tables and billiard tables and video games, right? And you're not going to get that working project cargo operating a crane. So it's been a challenge, to find qualified people who are interested in getting into this space.
So how long, you said that a crane operator could make six figures.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look in our industry, look at the longshoremen and the ILA, they're all in the six-figure range, right? But it does take time, right? But it's not
So,
day one you're going to be in there. But yeah,
okay,
you've
that's
got the
that's
great earning potential for sure for
that's
that
my next
type of
question.
work. Mhm.
How long does it take to learn how to operate a crane?
That I'm not sure. There's trade schools, that teach it. There's private industry. You can learn. It has to be private property, right? And enclosed private property to operate and get your training. So I'm not too familiar with that, Fred, on the time it takes. But if I'm going to venture a guess, I'm going to say it's anywhere between 3 to 6 years, right, to get
Oh,
properly trained on it, right? When you look at a college education, right, 4 years, it's kind of the same track, right? And especially some of the education paths, right, where you have to go for your master's, right? It's a 6, 7. During COVID, some people have stretched it out to 8, 9 years, right? But there it is a highly specialized field, and there's just not a lot of people that are out there, and it just kind of who are interested in it, and it kind of seems like it's all word of mouth. If your father, uncle, aunt, mother, they're in the industry and they can navigate and provide pathways to be able to get the younger workforce or family members into it. That's kind of what happens, right? Versus going out and saying, hey, I want to be a crane operator day one out of college or out of high school, right? So
well, I was, when you said earlier about it, I'm thinking, wow, there's some people I know that would be, they get a crane operator job. And I was thinking, I could do that part-time. It'd be kind of cool running one of those things and picking people up and dropping them in other places. But if you're telling me 3 years, yeah, I don't know if would want to go do that. So how's Harbor Freight Transport handling the this workforce aging issue?
That's a great question. You know, we've got a very, very strong internship program. Um, where each summer, even during, Christmas holiday, or winter break, we've got a stable of interns that, come to work, and through that they get exposure to it. Matter of fact, we just made a recent hire from a gentleman who was an intern with us at our Savannah, Georgia facility 2 summers ago. This gentleman is graduating out of the University of Tennessee supply chain management course. And, he had other job offers, and, he had other exposure to just transportation and logistics, more of like the truck broker um, aspect. And, my conversations with that person was they really liked the complexity of the project type cargo, and, being able to do the mental gymnastics, to do the conversion on the dimensions, etc., and just, being kind of a hands-on type industry that was really appealing to that person versus, here's a Fortune 500 desk job, where you kind of get the blinders on and do the tasks that are ahead of you. So uh, I think this, starting in June, I want to say we have 3 or 4 recent college grads who had served as who did internships with Harbor, and we're bringing them on board. So it's been a great way for us to keep that pipeline full.
So how would people sign up to be an intern?
Yeah, you could just reach out to myself, or into the rates email, probably be a good way. Rates at harborusa.com, and just ask for internship opportunities. Just say I'm looking for internship opportunities. We have those over the summer, Savannah, Georgia, or Newark, New Jersey. We've got multiple facilities, so absolutely. I think
Okay.
we're full this summer though, but
Okay.
coming up, yeah.
So if somebody would be interested in the future, it's email rates at harborusa.com and um
Just say internship
okay.
inquiry, right? Yeah,
Okay.
for sure.
Wasn't sure if there was a sign up page on the website. Who knows? Maybe there will be one in the future. Um,
Exactly.
okay, so let's move on to another topic. Um, right now, it seems that uh, there's huge amounts, and this is just in general, changes in regulatory and permitting processes all across the U.S., across multiple uh, levels of government. Um, so I'm assuming there have been some real regulatory permitting process changes in the shipping industry. Is that true? If so, what are some of them you've seen or heard?
Well, I wouldn't say that there's major changes that have happened. Permitting for oversized loads. Every state has their own rules and regulations. East of the Mississippi, the height is 13 feet 6 inches tall. West of the Mississippi, it's 14 feet. So you've got some laws like that are out there. But, um, you know, what we've seen is some advancements in technology, which will help with that regulatory and permitting challenges, right? There's companies that are out there who can help navigate, doing or route surveys, etc. And there's some programs out there that will actually, you can subscribe to and put your cargo dimensions and characteristics, and where it's going, and it'll give you exactly the layout of the permits that are needed by state. Um,
Ah, so it's not a
and
federal thing, it's a state by state thing.
it's a state by state as well as a federal enforcement, right? So For instance, state of California, I think it's every city that you go through or every county has to have their own permit, right? Versus just saying, state of Georgia, you can go out and you just apply for your permits through the Georgia Department of Transportation, right? And you can get it, and they're good for the entire state. So it is state dependent. Um, there's always been a huge push in terms of people trying to figure out ways to reduce the number of trucks on the road. So you've got some states where you can pull doubles, or triples, 3 28 foot, long trailers. So, and that reduces the number of trucks on the road, et cetera. But, in terms of the overweight and oversized permits, they're pretty, you know, there haven't been huge changes that I've been aware of right now. It's just the complexity about making sure you're compliant and having the correct permits.
So I want to go back to something you said about California. So California only makes you get a city by city um, permit. They don't make you do a city, county, and whatever else they can figure out.
Um, it's every municipality that you go through. I believe you have to have your own permit per that municipality, whatever it is, right? So you can't just go from Long Beach out to Corona, California, and utilize the same permit, right? You go through multiple counties or multiple municipalities, and they're going to get you for whatever they need, right?
Well, the last two words you can drop off.
Right. They're going to get you.
Exactly, which is why I'm surprised the counties aren't also requiring something because never mind. All right, so we hit the two things that I had been hearing, uh, what we'll say buzz about. What to you in talking with everybody was the biggest topic of discussion?
I spent a lot of time, meeting prospective clients and things like that, talking about business opportunities. But one of the major ones that I sat in on that I absolutely love, and the title of the session was "Uncertainty is the New Certainty," right? And it just rings true about everything that's going on. Well, quite frankly, everything. If you take, I'm just going to go back to 2014, 2015, right? That was the first labor disruption out on the West Coast, right? And that it didn't it threw the world, or domestically, it threw it into a tailspin, right? Labor wasn't, the contracts weren't finalized, et cetera. So, there's a big demand there. Then you move into, COVID-19. We all understand the challenges that happen there, right? So it just seems between the tsunamis and, fires, now we're in a war,
I was going to
I
come
don't,
to that next.
yeah, it's that really rang true. Uncertainty is basically the only certainty that we have going on right now, and it makes it difficult, basically on all playing fields, right? How do you pre-plan, in particular for, like, project type cargo, right? These things are planned out. They're well defined, and you're planning for something that's going to happen in the future, and you're hoping that in the future what you're planning for is stays consistent, right? And what we've seen with the war, right? that's not always the case. That kind of came out, well, it came out of nowhere, right? But we had challenges before, but now you've got the blockade, et cetera, right? And so that presents a whole new list of challenges. If you take training personnel, right? Take that issue. How do you train somebody um, in this ever changing environment, where you say, hey, here's the rules today as it stands, but something may change in the market. Throw that out the window. Now you got to react, right? So it's kind of a one of the best phrases I ever heard was when I was hired at APL Logistics, and it was an interview question, and the question was, you know, um, how do you operate in times of ambiguity, or can you operate at a high level in ambiguous situations, right? And it's a very difficult question, right? Because it puts a lot of people don't like operating without guardrails, right? And especially today's new young workforce, right? They're very, very regimented in what they do, and they rely heavily on technology. And something as simple as having a conversation can be very challenging, right? Because they're very text driven or instant messenger driven, etc. You know, certain things when you're dealing in an ambiguous environment, it gets people out of their comfort zone, and there's just no right or wrong answer, and you've got this gray area that you've got to operate in, and waiting for all the answers to make a decision in a very high paced environment. You're going to lose out on opportunities. So you've got to use past experience, judgment, and kind of operate on the 80-20 rule, right? Do I have 80% of the information? Yes, good. Let's go forward, make a decision, right? Whereas, everybody's always wants it cut and dry, right? And with it, all the uncertainty and changes that are out there, that's really difficult to achieve, right, in today's environment.
All right. So, how does Harbor Freight Transport help remove uncertainty for its clients?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Fred, and I think we've proven with our 78-year track history. We don't say no. We're solutions minded. That's why when you look at our book of business, yes, we do the heavy haul, and the out of gauge stuff. That's fine. We do disassembly and assembly. We do our own import and export packaging and crating, right? So we're a solutions minded company where we will listen to the customer, figure out what the requirements are. Given that 78 years of history and experience, fair chances we've had this situation come up somewhere before, that we can draw on that knowledge within our management team to say, hey, how do we do this, right? Whereas if you're a new company starting up, it can be very difficult. You don't have all the material handling equipment that's needed or necessarily to safely do the job or execute the job in a timely fashion, right? So, yeah, we've got a proven track history on it, and I think just the pure fact that we're willing to listen, and then think about it, draw on our experience, and then say, this is the solution we would have for you guys for this, right? And that goes, you know, that culture is instilled within the Harbor Freight Transport Company, from the dock workers to the carpenters on the export crating and packaging side. et cetera, all the way up to, senior management.
Okay, so you mentioned the war, and as somebody who watches oil prices, um, I, I get if it affects oil, but uh, most of Harbor Freight Transport's clients are not shipping oil.
Correct.
So how and you got shipments coming in from all over the world. So my question is how is this regional conflict that obviously affects oil? How is it affecting shipping that's not going through the Strait of Hormuz or the Persian Gulf? What's the effect of the war on non-oil related, non-Middle East shipping route uh, logistics?
Well, unfortunately, I'd say we've got a history of what 130 years of oil-based products, right?
Hmm.
So they're basically in everything that you touch in everyday's life, right? So, once there's a constraint on that oil, it's going to affect price. So you're seeing um, raw material costs increase, but on the transport side, all the well, not all the vessels, but the vast majority of all the vessels run on petroleum based bunker fuel. The vast majority of all of the Class 8 trucks in the US run on diesel fuel, right? So we've seen our trucking rates, our freight rates in particular, fuel surcharge, just escalate exponentially in a matter of weeks, right? And I'm talking significant change, right? I was just looking at the DOE average, Department of Energy average, which is published every Tuesday. It comes out and it shows the trends and price per gallon of diesel on the road. Let me pull it up. Um, just in the U.S. from April. Well, that's not in California alone, right?
Don't tell.
California's average diesel price is $7.32 a gallon,
Yep.
whereas the U.S. average is $5.40 a gallon. You know, a month
And
ago that was somewhere in the three, 3.90 to $4 a gallon, right? So when you're talking, a 2,600-mile move across the U.S. and your fuel surcharge jumps from 40 cents a mile up to 75 cents a mile, that's a
that's a
significant
chunk.
financial impact, and that goes right to your bottom lines. Take into the fact that the majority of these projects were quoted, budgetary quoted, um, 65, 75 days, previous. Those prices have now got to get reset in today's market when it's actually moving. So it's a lot of requoting, updating costs, and figures like that the industry's having to go through. But unfortunately, the bottom line is those costs are going to go to somebody, and that's you and me, Fred, and our families and everybody else, right?
I hear you. And I think it's June 1st or July 1st, I forget which. California's got a new gas tax or an additional gas tax, which may push regular gas up over $8 a gallon, from what I've heard. Definitely diesel's going way up, which means, of course, as you said, we get this whole spiral. So, other
Exactly.
than fuel surcharges, that I get because cost of gasoline goes up, it ripples through everything else. Are there any other issues from the war that is impacting shipping besides fuel surcharges?
Well, you've had the ocean carriers who, um, you know, have have made statements about $4,000 bounty, per container just from shipping on the Middle East,
Yeah.
and things like that. I mean, those are huge swings, So what happens is when you avoid, the most direct route, you add cost
Hmm.
and time, right? And or transportation logistics is just it's always been a just in time environment, right? So adding time and additional costs um, in any environment, that's not good. So
Okay. Any other thoughts, experiences you want to leave our listeners with respect to Breakbulk 2026?
um, it was a great event. JOC does a great job. Especially down in New Orleans, you get a lot of the stevedores and the shipping agencies, who do the trade on the Mississippi River and in the Gulf, and it's always great to go out and see different industries, and the Gulf with all the oil and gas and the infrastructure down there, New Orleans, Houston, Texas area. It really does specialize in that, right? And then you bring in the additional trade going up to the Mississippi. It's a unique environment, and I came out of that meeting. The majority of my career has been the retail apparel. West Coast, East Coast. High velocity, fast fashion, and attending this meeting, meeting some of the people, you just realize that transportation logistics, it's everywhere. It is literally everywhere. And we talk about these jobs, aging workforce. um, eh, Quite frankly, I mean, I'm not sure how anybody's out of a job, to be honest with you, in today's environment, especially aging workforce. You just got to get out and do a little research, right? And look into these industries and see what types of opportunities that are out there. Um, I think we're doing our new workforce a disservice by just saying, "Hey, you got to go to college, you got to get a degree, you got to go into finance or marketing, etc." Right? Um, Transportation logistics. It's a great world. You can carve out some really nice careers out of it. I was talking to a gentleman who's a marine surveyor, and I don't know if you know what a marine surveyor does, but they go out and they look at how the product is packaged, how it's is it properly lashed onto the vessel, etc. They document it, take pictures of it, and just talking to this gentleman, I was like, my God, what an interesting field, right? To be able to wake up and see new projects day in and day out, and yeah, you're doing the same things, right? But just the complexity and the diversity of what that person sees, right? That's exciting to me, right? Versus just staying at a desk and seeing the same four walls every day.
So my initial thought when you said Marine surveyor, well, that made me think about war zones and combat and things like that, but wrong type of Marine, never mind.
Yeah,
Um,
right. Yeah, no, no. These are, NCB inspectors, safety inspectors, marine surveyors, critical role in the supply chain link, right? That we don't even think about. You get this multi-million-dollar heavy piece of machinery or component, and it's only as good as the packaging and the lashing. you know.
all right. So we'll end this episode of Cargo Chronicles. Eric, how do people get a hold of you if they need something along these lines or info along these lines?
Yeah, just reach out to me via email, etrout@harborusa.com. Love
That's
to hear from you. Go ahead.
etrout@harborusa.com.
Correct. Yep.
All right, we'll be back again, hopefully next week with another episode of Cargo Chronicles, how Harbor Freight Transport talks logistics. Um, Hopefully your shipping is going well. If not, call Eric. He'll get you taken care of. Bye all.